As I roved out one May morning, near the verdant braes of Screen, I put my bank to a mossy tree to view the dew in the west country, the dew on the forest so green. A lad I spied near our burnside, with a lass neath the willow tree. Her lips were like the break of day, and she all a wan and a worn to see, and she all a worn to see. Oh, come and sit on the grass, said he, on the dewy grass so green, for it's been a long 3/4 of a year or more since I my true love seen, said he, since I my true love seen. Oh, I'll not sit on the grass, said she, nor lover I'll be thine, for I hear you love another pretty maid, and your heart's no longer mine, said she, and your heart's no longer mine. Oh, I'll go climb a tall, tall tree, and I will rob a wild bird's nest, and back I will bring what I find there to the arms that I love best, said he, to the arms that I love the best. I sang that song because about 42 years ago, it was my second time on this stage. I'd been press ganged into appearing in a play for Brian Hearn, who opened the Irish Arts Centre, and he needed to go to Central America, and he was playing the father in the play, and I was 24, 25, and he wanted me to play an older man. They had no choice but to accept me. And then a couple of months later after that, they maybe it was just my vanity, but they convinced me to get up and do a one-man show, and that was one of the songs that I sang. And the reason I sang it was because I come from South Derry, a wee place called Draperstown, and the parish is Ballinascreen, and that's at the verdant braes of Screen. There's another very famous song from that part of the country called Slieve Gallen Braes, known all over the place. And anyway, I'm here to tell you about my Uncle John. Now, my Uncle John never married. He died in his 80s, and there were 3 words that described him to most people, and they were a mixture of words that came from the Ulster Gaelic and combined with English, and also from Scotland as well, from Scots Gaelic, and he was considered to be Thran. I forgot one of them. It'll come to me. He was Thran, and he was Carnaptious. And just the way that he said those words, you understood that it wasn't a nice thing, but he was never that way to us. And I found Uncle John about 2 years ago. I had forgotten, not that I had forgotten about him, but he reminded me there was loads of stories that he had about him. He was so well known around the town that he was considered, he lived in the western end of the parish called Moninuna. My father came from there, and it's a hilly part of the town going up into the Sperrin Mountains to the west, and on the other side of it you can see Slieve Gallen that I mentioned. But Uncle John was a sheep farmer and a couple of small cattle. He would rear some cattle as well. But he was known for lots of things. He was the horizontal boxing champion of Ballinascreen. And it turns out there was another man in the next town over who, I won't tell you his name because he's a well-known faith healer. And he was the horizontal boxing champion of his town. But he was also a faith healer, like I just said. And very renowned. And Uncle John thought to himself, well, you know, if I'm the horizontal boxing champion of Ballinascreen and he's the horizontal boxing champion over there, maybe I could become a faith healer as well. And so he set about doing it, and he rented, there's a small community centre there in Moninuna called Rathdub, the Black Fort, where they would have community events, and he rented that and he put out flyers and posters all over the place, and everybody showed up on the first night because they knew what John was like, and they couldn't miss it. And they wheeled a man in a wheelchair. He was about in his 80s, and they took him up near the front, and Uncle John invited him to come up. John was his name as well, as it so happened, but not John Kelly, it was John Higgerty. And John Higgerty was pushed up, and Uncle John says, can you please help him stand up? And the man stood up, and Uncle John put his 2 hands on his shoulders and said a prayer, and the man dropped dead. And that was the last time he ever tried to be a faith healer. But he didn't realise that he was the first son of a second son. But you have the power if you're the 7th son of a 7th son, something like that, anyway. And he was also, he decided he had a notion one time that he wanted to join the Irish Navy because he heard that if you joined the Irish Navy, you could go home for your lunch. So he borrowed a boat and went up to Lough Fay, which is up in the mountains on the way over to Tyrone. And he started rowing across, and he got about halfway, and he got seasick. So nobody knew that had happened to him because he headed off and he went away to Dublin anyway. And years later when somebody asked him, so John, you were in the Irish Navy, he says, how long were you in the Irish Navy? And he says, 5'7". Think about that. Anyway, the story I'm going to tell you about, besides, he would disappear quite often. He would go off to England or to Scotland to work to make some money. And part of the reason he would go to, because he didn't get on too well with my grandmother, his mother, Martha. They were always at one another's throats. But he was a great sheep. With sheep, he could do loads of things with sheep that other ordinary people would. He was so much involved in sheep husbandry that he got invited over to Scotland by the team that cloned Dolly because they wanted to use his. And you all heard of the sheep Dolly, I'm sure you have. If you haven't, you weren't awake that day or something. And he was so good. And he learned some things about cloning and crossbreed and everything. And when he came back, he decided that he would crossbreed with a Moninuna sheepdog. He crossbreeded with a poodle. And he did it, and he succeeded, and it was called a moodle. And he hadn't gotten a name for it until he went to a music session one night, and he heard somebody lilt, and it was doodly-diddle, diddly-dum, diddly-doodly-diddle-dum. They said, that's it. So it was Doodle the Middle was the sheepdog's name. And he reared it and taught it to herd the sheep. And he also crossbred a couple of others, so there's a whole bunch of them there. And as a matter of fact, they got to be so good that he could stay at home having his breakfast, and he would do the whistles that the shepherds do to tell the dogs where to move to. He would do it to them to let them know what they had to do, and they'd go off and they'd bring the sheep back into the house, towards the house, and they'd be there waiting for Uncle John would be finished, and obviously he was probably taking them off to the market. But he finally, because he had so many of them, he gave one of them to a young lad called Seamus McCluskey, who was a cousin of ours. And Seamus delighted in it, and he was up in the mountains with the moodle all the time. Until unfortunately one day, the moodle, Doodle the Middle, went to jump over a fence, and there was barbed wire on the top of it, and didn't poor Doodle the Middle lose his doodle-doo, you know. and that was really the end of Doodle the Middle. So he died anyway, and Seamus thought the decent thing to do would be to bring him to a taxidermist, and he did. He brought him to a taxidermist, and they stuffed him, and he sat in the house for years. And this was brilliant, you know. And then Seamus was reading the paper one day and he heard that antique road shows from the British show was coming over to Maherafelt. And Seamus thought to himself, no, it might be worth my while to take Doodle the Middle in and see what kind of money you would get for him anyway. And he arrives down there and he gets up to the front of the line carrying Doodle the Middle. And one of the very British presenters said, oh my God, I've never seen an animal like this in my life. I've heard about Doodle the Middle. It's a magnificent creature. What do you think he'd fetch? And Seamus said, sticks. Now, a couple of years later, Seamus got himself a job in one of the local supermarkets in Cookstown. It was about 13 miles over the way into Tyrone. And Derry people don't really like going into Tyrone, but that's another story altogether. And Seamus was working there as assistant manager, or he was going around getting things done. And one day, a man behind him taps him on the shoulder, and Seamus turns around and the man says to him, I'd like half of a cabbage. Yeah. And Seamus, we do not give people or sell halves of cabbage. He says, well, I'd like to speak to the manager. Hold on, says Seamus, I'll go and talk to him myself for you. And he goes into the manager's office and says, Mr. Higgerty, there's a man, Egypt out here, wants to buy half a cabbage, and he turns around and there's the man had followed him in. And Seamus quick as lightning and says, and this nice gentleman has offered to buy the second half. So that was great, and the manager was very pleased that there was settled and there was no discontented customers. And later on in the day, the manager's walking the floor and he sees Seamus, he's stocking stuff, and he comes over, Seamus, I was very impressed by how you handled that situation today. You could go places in this company. And by the way, where are you from? And Seamus says, oh, I'm from Draperstown. There's nothing but whores and football players there. And the man says, listen, Seamus, that's not very nice. My wife comes from Draperstown. And Seamus looked at him and says, which team did you play for? Uncle John, there you are now, right? Now, this is going to be one big long story, continuing for a while, so just resting in. If you need to go for a drink, come on back in again. Anyway, John had decided he was going to go across to England to make some money. And he liked his 3 nephews of his brother Paddy's who lived out in Moninina. And he says to them, you know what, when I come back, I'm going to buy the 3 of us a nice suit. And true to his word, when he came back, he said to them, come with me, we're going to go buy a suit, and we're going over the mountain into Dungiven to Hassans. Now, Hassans were famous for the suits that they made. They didn't take them into John Burns in Draperstown because they didn't do the same quality of suits. And Hassans, you could have a choice of 2 colours. You could have a navy blue suit or a navy blue suit. And the other thing that was famous about them, they had very wide pants legs. And once you were wearing the pants, you could take 3 steps inside the pants until the pants leg would move with you. So here are the 3 boys, all decked out in 3 beautiful suits, and they decided, well, we'll have to give them a test run. And they went off up to Rathdoff, the community centre. There was a big ceilidh on there that night, and they go in there and they hook up with the 3 Kennedy girls. And they lived about a mile away from their house, and they had a grand time. The 3 of them had just recently qualified as teachers, in the last couple of years. And they were dancing away, and then the lad said, would you like to go for a mineral? And there was no alcohol served at those functions. You could have white lemonade, brown lemonade, red lemonade, and maybe an occasional orange. So they had those, and they would go back out dancing. And the fellas said to the girls, do you mind if we walk you home? No, not at all. And they're having the great crack going back home. And when they reached the house, one of the boys says to the girls, says, would you mind if we came and took you out next Friday night? And the girl said, that'd be grand. Well, definitely come over next Friday night, but make sure when you come that each one of you bring a box of chocolates for my mother. She loves chocolates, Cadbury's preferably. And she loves Jameson. That's my fact. No, she doesn't love it. Mr. Kennedy loves the Jameson. Maybe I had too much to drink myself there. Anyway, the following Friday, Mr. and Mrs. Kennedy are sitting inside, and the girls are all sitting at the table getting themselves ready. And there comes a knock on the door, and Mr. Kennedy goes out to the door and opens up, and there's one of the boys, and he says, what can I do for you? He says, my name is Joe, and I want to know, would Flo like to go to see a show, you know? And Mr. Kennedy, absolutely, that's great, why not? Why don't you come on in? And Joe hands him the box of chocolates and the bottle of Jameson, and he goes in, and Mr. Kennedy gives the chocolates to Mrs. Kennedy and sets the bottle on the table, and he turns around to Mrs. Kennedy, and the girl says, Joe here wants to know, Flo, if you'd like to go see a show. And Flo says, absolutely, and off with the pair of them. So Mrs. Kennedy's sitting there eating the Cadburys, and Mr. Kennedy opened up the Jameson, poured himself a wee drink, and he's sipping it. The next thing, there's another knock on the door, and he goes out to the door, and there's one of the other brothers. Just like the brother before him, wearing the beautiful new suit, white shirt and a tie, impeccably dressed, carrying a bottle of Jameson and a box of chocolates. And Mr. Kennedy says, what can I do for you? He says, my name is Lamps, and I wanted to know if Lamps would like to go to the dance, perchance. And Mr. Kennedy says, why don't you come on in? And he takes the whiskey and the chocolates and gives the other box of chocolates, the second box of chocolates, to Mrs. Kennedy, and puts the whiskey down on the table for himself. And he turns to the two girls that were left and says, Lamps, Lance wants to know, would you like to go to the dance perchance? And Lance says, sure, and off with the pair, and away they go. And Mr. Kennedy's having another sip of Jameson, and Mrs. Kennedy's digging into the chocolates, and there's an awful kicking noise at the door and a rattling, and he goes out and he opens the door, and there's the third brother, and his tie is pulled down, the shirt is open down to his stomach, there's a brown ring of chocolate around his mouth, and there's half a bottle of Jameson left. And Mr. Kennedy says, what can I do? My name is Tucker, and Mr. Kennedy slammed the door shut. And Uncle John has invaded my space so much, there are other stories to tell as well. He was driving a lorry one time, and he came upon this Englishman who was driving a lorry, and a load of monkeys in the back of the lorry, and the lorry broke down on him, and your man was trying to get it fixed and couldn't, and he sees Uncle John coming. He didn't know him was Uncle John. He stopped him and says, could you do me a favour? If I give you £50, would you take these monkeys to the Belfast Zoo? Because I have to wait here till the lorry gets fixed, and it would be a great favour to me. Uncle John says, sure. And off he goes. And the Englishman is there waiting for the RAC, the Royal Automobile, whatever the hell they called it back in those days. And they hadn't come by the time, and he noticed Uncle John coming back on the road, and he flags him down, and he looks in, and the monkeys are still in the back of the lorry. And the man says, I thought I'd give you £50 to take the monkeys to the zoo. Of course I took them to the zoo, and we had some money left over. We're going to the movies now. And the last one. When he got older, as we all do, he couldn't really do things for himself, and they had set up, and they have them in the north of Ireland, and I think they have them in the south too. They call them folds. They're like houses that are built, apartments, houses, flats, and care for them in a little setting on their own, so they won't feel so lonely. Some of them who are able can live in the houses, or they can live in the flats, and then when they're not so well, they go into where they can have take care of them. Uncle John got a spot in there, but he still went out, because he was in the town now. He'd go out with some of his old cronies, and they'd go for a drink with him, and he's there about 2 weeks, and he's met up with them for about maybe 4 or 5 nights, and one of them says, Uncle John, you know, you're up in that place, the Fold. He says, what's it like? Uncle John says, this is late on too. Uncle John says, sure, why don't you come back to my place and I'll show it to you? And they grabbed some drinks to take out, and they went back home, and they're sitting around there drinking and making a lot of noise. And in the middle of it, one of his friends says, what's that big bronze looking thing hanging on the wall there? He says, Uncle John says, that's my talking clock. And says, what do you mean talking clock? I'll show you how it works. And he takes a hammer, and he goes over and hits the big bronze circle, and bang, 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 bang. Next thing, there's a voice on the other side of the wall. Do you not know it's 3:15 in the morning, Kelly? And if you want any more, I'll be talking to you outside. When when I came to America 47 years ago, they had a party for me because I was leaving. I was coming here with the Derry football team, and they were coming on tour, and they were very nice to take me because they knew I wasn't coming back. And in the old days, you've all heard of the American wake, where when somebody in days gone by, when they would have to take ships across, and it was called a wake because they would never see their sons and their daughters anymore. But in my case, I've been back numerous times, and up in the north, they call it a convoy, conveying you across.
Okay.
People came in and they played some music and told stories and joked around. It wasn't as desperate, unfortunately, or fortunately, as the American wake was, because families were not going to see each other. And there's a wonderful song, A Stour Macree, that used to be sung particularly in the west of Ireland when people were leaving, on the morning that they were leaving. A Stour Macree, when you are far away from the home that you soon will be leaving, for there is many's a time by night and by day that your heart will be surely grieving. For the stranger's land may be bright and fair, and rich in its treasures golden. You may pine, I know, for the long, long ago, and the heart that is never olden. A Stour Macree, in the stranger's land, there is plenty of wealth and whaling, and though gems adorn the great and the grand, there are faces with hunger paling. Though the road is weary and hard to tread, and the lights of its cities blind you, you will turn, I know, to Erin's green shore, and the one you are leaving behind you. A Stour Macree, when the evening mist over mountains and meadows is falling, will you turn a Stour from the throng and the mist? For you will hear a voice that is calling, and the sound of a voice will surely be mine, of somebody speedy returning. Aaron, Aaron, won't you come back soon to the one who will always love